The oil was already flowing. The interests were already set. As the world emerged from World War II, Venezuela stood richer, more visible, and more vulnerable than ever before. Democracy briefly stepped into the spotlight, but in a land where oil dictated power, ideals were fragile and temporary. This chapter begins where hope collides with reality. It is the story of how elected leadership gave way to military rule, how modernization masked repression, and how stability once again mattered more than freedom. In the shadows of Cold War politics, Venezuela learned a hard lesson. Governments may fall, but oil never stops shaping destiny. The year 1945 marked a turning point not only for the world emerging from the ashes of World War II, but for Venezuela as well. The global order was being rewritten. Empires weakened, the United States rose as a superpower, and oil became the lifeblood of modern civilization. Venezuela, sitting atop one of the largest proven oil reserves on Earth, now found itself at the center of history. But with power came pressure, and with oil came conflict. After decades of authoritarian rule, Venezuela experienced a political awakening. In October 1945, a civilian-military alliance overthrew the existing government, ushering in what many believed would be a new democratic era. For the first time, ordinary Venezuelans felt their voices might matter. In 1947, Romulo Gallegos, a novelist and intellectual, was elected president in the country's first truly democratic election. His victory symbolized hope that Venezuela could control its destiny, manage its oil wealth responsibly, and reduce foreign dominance. The United States watched cautiously. Democracy was welcomed in principle, but stability and access to oil remained paramount. Gallegos spoke openly about reforming oil contracts and increasing state control over resources. These ideas raised eyebrows in Washington and alarm bells among oil executives. The Gallegos government introduced policies aimed at ensuring Venezuela received a fairer share of oil revenues. The most significant was the 50-50 profit-sharing principle, which demanded that foreign oil companies split profits evenly with the Venezuelan state. This policy would later influence oil-producing nations worldwide, but at the time it was revolutionary. To American corporations accustomed to favorable terms, it felt like a threat. While the United States did not openly oppose Gallegos, confidence in his leadership weakened. The Cold War had begun. Washington viewed Latin America through the prism of ideology. Any government asserting economic independence risked being labeled unstable, or worse, sympathetic to socialism. In November 1948, less than a year after Gallegos took office, the military struck. Tanks rolled through Caracas. The president was arrested and exiled. Democracy collapsed overnight. The coup leaders justified their actions by citing chaos and inefficiency, but many Venezuelans believed foreign interests played a silent role. The United States, while officially neutral, quickly recognized the new military government. Once again, stability triumphed over democracy. The message was clear. Governments could change, but oil must flow. Out of the post-coup power struggle emerged Marcos Pérez Jiménez, a disciplined military officer with a vision of order, modernization, and absolute control. By 1952, he had consolidated power and declared himself president following a manipulated election.
Perez Jimenez ruled with an iron fist. Political parties were banned, opponents disappeared, prisons filled with dissidents. Yet, paradoxically, his rule brought rapid development. Highways, skyscrapers, and public buildings transformed Caracas into one of Latin America's most modern capitals. Oil revenues funded massive infrastructure projects. To foreign observers, Venezuela appeared prosperous and stable. To the United States, Perez Jimenez was a reliable partner.
He prioritized anti-communism above all else. Perez Jimenez positioned himself as a staunch opponent of leftist movements. This alignment secured him diplomatic support and military cooperation from Washington. American oil companies thrived. Contracts remained favorable. U.S. advisors trained Venezuelan security forces. Intelligence cooperation increased. In return, Venezuela enjoyed access to American markets and political backing. Human rights abuses were quietly ignored. This unspoken agreement strengthened the belief among many Venezuelans that their sovereignty was compromised, that Washington preferred dictators who protected its interests over democratic leaders who challenged them. By the mid-1950s, Venezuela was one of the richest countries in Latin America by GDP per capita. Imported goods flooded markets. The middle class expanded. Foreign tourists arrived in growing numbers. But beneath the surface, fear ruled daily life. The secret police monitored conversations. Newspapers were censored. University campuses became centers of resistance. Students, intellectuals, and workers began organizing underground movements. Many of them would later become key figures in Venezuela's future political struggles and fierce critics of U.S. involvement. Oil revenues gave Perez Jimenez power, but they also exposed his regime to danger. As inequality widened and repression intensified, opposition grew stronger. The lavish lifestyle of the elite contrasted sharply with the hardships of rural communities. Internationally, attitudes toward authoritarianism were shifting. The United States, under pressure to promote democratic values, began distancing itself from openly brutal regimes. By 1957, strikes, protests, and military dissent increased. The illusion of invincibility shattered. In January 1958, the military turned against Perez Jimenez. Facing widespread unrest and dwindling support, he fled the country aboard a plane loaded with wealth. Crowds poured into the streets of Caracas, celebrating the collapse of dictatorship. Political prisoners were freed. Exiles returned home. Venezuela stood on the brink of a new chapter. For the United States, the fall of Perez Jimenez was a recalibration moment. Washington quickly adapted, supporting a transition to civilian rule, this time hoping democracy and stability could coexist. But the memory lingered. Many Venezuelans would never forget that the dictator had ruled so long with foreign acceptance. As 1958 came to a close, Venezuela faced a defining question. Could it finally control its oil, its politics, and its future without foreign interference? The answer was uncertain. What was clear, however, is that oil had become more than a resource. It was a curse, a blessing, and a battlefield. The relationship between Venezuela and the United States had deepened, but so had mistrust. The conflict was no longer silent. It was waiting.